Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Teacher of the Year, Shanna Peeples.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It is such a pleasure, such an honor to be here today. And I love this event. This is really one of the best things that I could have ever asked to sort of open for, be the opening act of. I will tell you that about 8 years ago, my principal asked me if I would be willing to teach refugee students in a summer school program. And because I'm such a people pleaser, I don't really listen to the ends of sentences very well because I'm so eager to say yes. So I said yes without really knowing what I was getting myself into. So my students came from Myanmar and East Africa. And my daughter at the time, also a middle school student, was really worried about the fact that I would not be cool enough for these students. And so she loaded a ringtone into my phone, which was really, she did what she could to try to make her middle-aged mother seem cool. And my ringtone went off on the first day that I worked with these kids because I had forgotten to silence my phone. And it was a popular song on the radio at that time that said, "This is why I'm hot." She tried to make me cool. So my students from Sudan, Somalia, Kenya, Burundi, Tanzania, as they say, from the Greene people in Burma, they all turned around at once and said, in perfectly unaccented English, "This is why I'm hot." And I thought, music. If I can't do anything else, I can bond with them with music. And I already had a habit of having Michael Jackson Fridays. And so imagine my surprise when these students who come out of the Maylock camp in Thailand, the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, knew all the words to Billie Jean. So I went to my principal and I said, "Okay, so here's what I need from you. I need a karaoke machine." Yeah, no, really, I need a karaoke machine. And he bought one for me, and we began using karaoke to help these students. And what I saw is these students, so many of whom had come from trauma, because let's face it, you're not a refugee because you say, we'd really love to visit Amarillo, Texas. If only to eat the 72-ounce steak they promise is free if you eat it in an hour. They come there because they are fleeing something terrible. So music, Michael Jackson, pop music, gave us a way to reconnect with their joy. And I thought about that as my own daughters continued their study as string students. My oldest played the violin, and my youngest plays the cello. And they both said to me, "I don't know what it is about music, Mom, but music does something for me. It lets me say things I can't say any other way." And I thought about that in working further with students when I moved on to the high school level, and I had students who were 16, 17, 18 years old, and they couldn't speak very much English, but I still wanted to help them tell their story. So they were able to take images and choose music to say what they didn't have the words to say. The music created the tone and the mood for these very profound, very touching digital narratives that these students were able to do. And to me, that's the importance of music and an arts education for all students. And regardless of your content area, I think we all have to be advocates for the arts, and particularly music programs, because it gives our children, thank you, gives our children a vocabulary for what they cannot say in words. And to me, that's one of the best things about it. Now, I was reading up on some music research because I actually started out not as a teacher, but as a disc jockey long ago and far away at a country music station. But I was reading some research about music. And so there are these researchers at McGill University, and they wanted to test the dopamine effect of a couple of things: cocaine, music, and food. And so they put these people, I mean, wouldn't you have loved to have volunteered for this research? So they put these people in a room. And the people who, I guess, the cocaine trial showed a 22% spike in dopamine levels, the happy drug in your brain. But music, when they played their favorite music, it showed a 21% spike in dopamine activity. And food, by the way, only showed a 6% spike, which I was a little surprised. So I would say that maybe we shouldn't be focusing so much on anti-drug messages to our students as maybe pro-music messages. Maybe try drums, not drugs. Just a suggestion. Thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for being a warrior for students, warriors of kindness, warriors of hope that show students the possibilities that lie within them. And I very much am honored to be your colleague. I'm also very much honored to introduce another warrior for music, Phillip Riggs, who is a National Board Certified teacher, and for 27 years has taught music and has one of the coolest awards you could ever give a teacher, a Grammy. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Phillip Riggs.
So much. That's awesome. Wow, good afternoon. It's an honor to be with you today. I want to thank Peggy and all the folks at the National Board Office for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful conference. I've actually been at another conference in Indianapolis, a music conference, and they were kind enough to work with me to get me in this morning and back to my students in that conference this afternoon. So definitely want to thank them for that. Also have some sad news. There was a group of students that was going to be with us today from Woodley Hills Elementary School. But unfortunately, they had some bus trouble, and they're not here. But I'm going to ask you, because they're going to see this on the stream, so if you would join me in giving them a great round of applause, they'll hear it all. We hope they'll get a chance to catch Black Violin somewhere on tour, right, when they're back in the area. I would ask you to join me in just a quick activity, if you would, that a good friend of mine, Dr. Tim Lutzenheiser, uses often, just to kind of set you up for a couple of things I want to mention to you before we start the concert. So if you take both your hands and just clasp them together. Everybody got it? Okay, raise your hand if your left thumb is on the top. Okay, raise your hand if your right thumb is on the top. Anybody put your thumbs together? Anybody do that instead of crossing? Yeah, so what did that feel like? No, actually now I want you, whichever thumb you put on the top, take your hands apart, put them back together, but the other way. Is that uncomfortable? Why is that uncomfortable? It's not natural, is it? Yeah. Dr. Tim says the folks that put their left thumb on the top are said to be better kissers. And and the folks who put their right thumb on the top are better thinkers. So, and I hate to tell you, but the people who put their thumbs together, they think they're better kissers. So, what does that have to do with being at an educators conference? Well, sometimes being out of our comfort zone is uncomfortable. And that's a very simple example of that. But a few things I want to share with you are going to challenge you maybe to be a little uncomfortable and outside the box in your classroom. I think it's so cool that an English teacher just talked to you about the importance of music, and I'm really not going to say much about specifically the importance of music, although obviously I think it is. So with that in mind, the idea I have for you is delivering content is not your most important role in the classroom. Of course, we all know content that we teach is important and fundamental in all we do, but I would make the case it's not the foundation, and you can't build a house without a foundation. So I think a lot of our students, what they need is the foundation before we deal with the content. And I've heard a lot of that in the sessions I've been able to attend today. Said in many different ways, but I still think that's the point that was being made. I've been really fortunate the last 6 months as I've been through the Grammy process, being a semifinalist and a finalist and eventually the winner, that students from as far back as 25 plus years ago reaching out through emails and cards and letters, saying congratulations and thank you. And without exception, they all thanked me for taking the time to get to know them individually and to find out more about their lives inside and outside the classroom. Very few mentioned a piece of music that we played. Very few of them mentioned a musical concept that we learned. It was really about the relationships that we had and that we made. And so I challenge you to think about that, particularly that student that gets lost in the middle, not the high achieving student and maybe even the lower student that gets some extra help, but that B minus C plus student, it's really easy for them to get lost in the shuffle, particularly in a big classroom. So I'd encourage you to think about that. I was recently in a clinic with Greene, who's a retired music professor from the University of Miami, and he said, why you teach is more important than what you teach. Man, that hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't tell you what he said the next 5 minutes because I was still, thinking, why do I teach, So again, I would encourage you to think about that. He also challenged us with a couple other questions. What kind of teacher do you want to be? Not math or music or English or, computer science. We learned earlier today we need more of those teachers, right? Not that kind of teacher, but what is it you want to be for your students? And then the second question is, what is stopping you from being that teacher? And then the third question is, how do you overcome those roadblocks? I didn't say I was going to have answers. I just said I was going to have questions for you, right? To me, building meaningful relationship with individuals and with the community, the class community and the school community, it really is fundamental and has to be most important. I know you're probably thinking to yourself, I barely have time to cover all the material that's required of my state before we start testing. That goes to number 2 in the questions, I think. What are the roadblocks that are keeping you from doing that? And that's one of them. How do we find time to teach more computer science? We talked about that earlier today. Perhaps we need to be teaching the subjects we're teaching through coding and computer science. So we're sort of getting our bang for our buck there. In an earlier session today, in the Connecting Deeply Across Distance session, Benji Howard spoke about kids feeling safe, inspired, and soulful. Man, and again, that soulful comment really hit me. So if you ask your classes if they feel safe and inspired and soulful in your classes, what do you think they would say? Yes. I would hope they would, right? Or I hope we're at least making the attempt to be that. And then another question is, how do you deal with the fundamental stereotype issues in our society? And there's been a lot of conversation about that these past 2 days. And maybe we should follow the lead of Black Violin and their music teacher. These 2 artists that we're about to hear are the result of a teacher that took the time to get to know them. According to an article in the Miami Herald, Will and Kev owe their careers to their music teacher, James Miles. He saw the pair's potential before either of them were even able to see it themselves. He says, all I did was make them realize they had talent and ability and are special. I love that he said, all I really did. Wow, wouldn't you love to be able to do that for your students? Even 2 students in a teaching career. I don't think it's ironic that their newest album is entitled Stereotypes. And I think they've entitled it that, from what I understand, is because their music and their approach to music attempt to break the stereotypes that they've lived. Musicians don't like to have their music to be pigeonholed into specific categories. They just like to make music to communicate with their listeners. And I think that's exactly what Black Violin does. So you're certainly in for a Bach meets hip hop performance this afternoon. I would ask you to join me in welcoming to the stage Black Violin.